If I had a nickel for every time I had to review a movie featuring autism parenting this week, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that happened twice, right? Recently, I found out about a movie that actually just came out last year from Bleecker Street Productions, and it was directed by Tony Goldwyn, none other than the voice of Disney's Tarzan himself. This movie is called Ezra, and Ezra is a film about an autistic child who himself is named Ezra, and whose father is a struggling comedian who is mentally unstable and attacks anyone and everyone who criticizes what he does. He lives with his father, who is Ezra's grandfather, played by none other than Robert De Niro. This year, I've actually reviewed 3 different films that essentially have the same theme of parenting an autistic child. The first being The Unbreakable Boy, followed by True Confessions, and now this. The Unbreakable Boy was a film released by Lionsgate earlier this year and starred Zachary Levi as the father of an autistic child, and was met with generally negative reception from the autistic community, especially due to its lack of involvement from actually autistic people. True Confessions was a Disney movie starring Shia LaBeouf as an autistic teenager, despite not actually being autistic himself, and was actually received well on its release back in 2002, but naturally has come under more scrutiny since then, especially when it comes to how it shows parenting of an autistic child, and again, not casting any autistic actors. The thing about Ezra, which released last year, is that on paper, this seems actually to show some possible promise, given the fact it actually does star an autistic actor as the autistic child in this story. Finally, some actual representation. So, does this mean this movie is actually good, then?
There's a lot of information about things that are happening with the CDC, the pharmaceutical companies. There's a lot of things that are not said. I, as a parent of a child who has autism, I'm concerned.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Unfortunately, Ezra does seem to fall into the exact same camp as movies like The Unbreakable Boy, True Confessions, or Music, because ultimately, despite being the namesake of the film, this movie isn't really about Ezra at all, it's about his dad. Boy, that sure does sound familiar. How we are still receiving movies like this today, I really will never know. This film is also just incredibly harmful as a whole with what it chooses to portray as a suitable way to parent an autistic kid, with the film trying to show that a lack of accommodation is a good way to try and raise a child with autism, as well as showcasing some incredibly abusive and volatile behavior from the father in this film, despite apparently being the hero of this film. Gee, what a great father figure, ladies and gentlemen. There's also the very obvious elephant in the room with Robert De Niro himself, and why his inclusion in this film is rather troubling, but probably very intentional too. So today, I want to discuss exactly why Ezra really fumbles the bag when it comes to showcasing how important accommodating for an autistic person really is, and why also it just shows some really awful autism parenting as a whole, as well as how the autistic kid is just used as a prop for comedy in this film, and sadly here, that is quite literal. But first, let's talk about how this film became a thing to begin with. The idea for this film actually came from its lead writer, Tony Spiridaki's own personal life. Tony actually has an autistic son himself named Dimitri, who often did not like being touched and was very particular to certain textures and sounds. His dad felt he had to find ways to diminish to the betterment of those around Dimitri. Eventually, he began scripting a movie loosely based on the experience he'd had in his life raising Dimitri while Dimitri was entering his teenage years in the script, which ultimately ended up in the hands of Tony's friend, that being Tony Goldwyn, who immediately took a liking to this script and offered to direct this film and get it distributed through Bleecker Street. Robert De Niro also immediately signed on to act in this film, stating the film resonated with him since one of his 7 children is autistic. William Fitzgerald, a young autistic teenager, was also brought in by the studio since he seemed like a good fit to them for the role of Ezra. And he was also willing to give acting a shot since he wanted experience for a YouTube channel he was looking to start. The film initially held a small screening at the Toronto Film Festival in 2023 before getting a wide international release in 2024. So with all that out of the way, what exactly is Ezra about specifically? Ezra stars Bobby Cannavale as a divorced comedian named Max who is caring for his autistic son, Ezra, who has recently been expelled from a few different schools for supposedly inappropriate behavior. Max often uses Ezra as a topic during his comedy routine at various clubs, which already is clearly a very major red flag even at the very start of this film. In the opening scene, Max is shown talking to a group of other comedians at the club he works at who criticize him for using his autistic son in his comedy routine. At first, this seems like it might be a good thing, with Max maybe learning to A, be a better parent to Ezra by not bringing him up to hundreds of strangers in a random comedy club, and B, maybe learning to not use autism as a punchline at all in the first place. Unfortunately, this inevitably does not go as planned.
Max, this autism is depressing.
You can talk about whatever you want if you give us a reason to want to listen. And I want to listen. I think my cousin's autistic. But it's got to be funny.
See, the sign says comedy on it, not a funeral parlor.
What is this, a intervention?
I disagree. You need to go deeper, further, make a whole set out of it.
Yeah, we'll make a whole evening out of it. You know, disabilities with Max.
The fact that all these comedians somehow think autism is something that should be jabbed at in their club is wildly disrespectful and also just downright disgusting. Why in the world would they think this is anywhere near a good idea? Unfortunately, the egging on from the other comedians leads Max to bringing Ezra to the club with him one night as a way to prop up his usual comedy routine and also as a way to try and bring Ezra into an environment that he feels he should force Ezra to be more involved in. There's two very big, blatant issues with this. Firstly, the fact that Max thinks it's okay to joke about his autistic son in front of hundreds of strangers in front of a comedy club just makes him look like a total deadbeat. But the fact that he's now actually physically bringing Ezra into the club with him in the hopes of further amplifying his routine, in his hopes of getting a spot on a late night talk show, is just outright despicable. But secondly, the fact he's also trying to use this as an opportunity to force Ezra to participate in environments he normally feels very uncomfortable in is just bad parenting. And honestly just comes off as straight up evil. Ezra is shown throughout this film to be very sensitive to certain textures, loud noises, bright lights, and lots of people talking all at once, all of which are things that would be amplified tenfold at a club like this. And Max knows this and deliberately takes his son to this club as a way to try and cure his autistic sensitivity to these things. Why in the world is this shown as okay? Ezra even attempts to talk back to Max in this situation, and rightfully so, since what Max is doing is not okay. However, Max doesn't seem to bother to acknowledge this whatsoever.
Stand up and take the wig off, Ez.
Stop talking about me!
You know, try to have a little respect, okay, Ez? I'm up here humiliating myself to give you a better life. All right? Good to you, you little prick.
How are you good to him? You just brought into this club against his will, and now you're up on stage actively making fun of him. And using him as a prop for your own comedy routine to try and get on some talk show. How is any of this good? Max really seems to constantly just be incredibly controlling and just straight up abusive to Ezra, and this is shown again not long after this comedy club scene. When Ezra is taking a bath and doesn't sense that the water he's turned on is incredibly hot. His dad automatically starts yelling at him in this scene about the water being too hot, which causes Ezra to start breaking down and hitting himself, calling himself stupid.
No.
Stupid,
Hey, come on, sit down.
Stop it!
Stop that, okay?
Stupid,
Stop that. You're not
stupid,
stupid.
stupid,
You're not.
stupid,
Stop hitting yourself. Hey, hey, hey.
Gee, maybe he's doing that because you keep yelling at him for no reason. This really is not going to help anything at all in a situation like this, and yet Ezra's father seems to think the only way to solve any problem he has with Ezra is by either forcing him to go to an environment that is ultimately unhealthy for him, or to straight up yelling at him. What even? Eventually, Ezra's mom and her boyfriend are discussing how they want to keep Max away from Ezra since they're concerned that Max is creating a very unhealthy environment for Ezra, which, in all honesty, he is. However, Ezra overhears their conversations and misinterprets it as them planning to kill Max. In a state of panic, he runs out into the street in an attempt to warn Max, but ends up getting hit by a car and sent to the hospital. After this, a psychologist tells Ezra's mom and dad that he should attend a school for kids with special needs and also be given Risperdal as a daily medication. Max, however, ends up flying off the handle about this and ends up physically assaulting the psychologist because he thinks he should be still parenting Ezra the way he always has been, by forcing him to go to comedy clubs and such instead of giving him medication. No, I am not making this up. The fact this film tries to make Max the hero for taking care of Ezra when in actuality he's doing incredible harm to him and more than likely is the reason Ezra has been expelled from several schools already, and now Max has attacked someone who was trying to help Ezra is absolutely mind-blowing. Max truly only cares about himself and using Ezra as a prop to make himself feel better. After this, Max receives a restraining order on Ezra and is not allowed to see him for a month. Of course, he doesn't take kindly to this and decides to do something so outrageously awful that I still can't believe was actually shown in this film. Before I explain exactly what that was though, since honestly it's a bit triggering, I'm going to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. I do videos like this overall, often on topics related to film, so if you like this video so far, you'll likely enjoy my other ones as well. Also consider joining my Twitch streams, where we've actually been raising money for the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, which is a great organization run by autistic people, for autistic people. I've been also trying to hit Twitch Partner to help get this charity in the eyes of more people as a result, since most people still don't know about it, so all the support will be much appreciated over there for that too. Since Twitch Partner requires you to have an average viewership of 75 CCV for about 2 months. You can also check out my Discord, where you can suggest topics for me to cover here on YouTube, and check out my letterbox to see what I've already reviewed before. All links are down below. But now, let's get into what happens with Ezra and his awful father. Once again, slight trigger warning for this scene, so I'll leave a timecode down below if you'd like to skip it. Max ends up sneaking into Ezra's room one night since he's staying with Max's father, played by Robert De Niro. Max ends up kidnapping Ezra and taking him in the car with him, while Ezra is somewhat still loopy from the medication he took and is also half asleep, making him all too easy for Max to influence to get into his car and drive with him across the country to Michigan. Max's hope is that he can escape to Michigan to keep controlling Ezra and also escape from any consequences he might have with the law for breaking his restraining order, and also keep Ezra out of the special needs school he was sent to. What in the world? There is so much blatantly wrong with this from the get-go, and the fact that the writers thought it would be an okay thing to put into the film to try and make their hero character look even better is absolutely infuriating. Why in the world did anybody think this is a good idea? This really doesn't make Max look any better by any and all means. He just looks even worse. The fact that he is literally breaking the law by breaking his restraining order on Ezra and also trying to get him to get into his car with him at a time when he knows Ezra will be easy to influence is absolutely deplorable and just really gross. And perhaps the worst part of this all is that somehow his idea to take Ezra across the country to teach him to put himself in situations that overstimulate him and make him uncomfortable somehow actually works and is shown as a good thing here. To give an example, when Ezra and Max are driving to Michigan, Max is constantly trying to force Ezra to make eye contact with him.
Ezzy, I need your eyes, okay? This is very important.
Not making eye contact is actually a very common thing with people on the spectrum, myself included. It's not an intentional sign of rudeness by any means, it often is just more of a comfort level issue, since it can be daunting to make eye contact with someone as an autistic person. However, Max continues to keep getting on his son for not making eye contact with him, which honestly isn't really that big of a problem overall, since his son still does communicate with him, even if he's not always making direct eye contact. However, Max just won't leave Ezra alone about this for really no reason at all, and continues to harp on Ezra to make eye contact all the way to Michigan. As a result, by the film's end, Ezra magically is able to look at everyone he talks to in the eye, and also is totally okay with being touched and has no more texture issues. Wow, what a true miracle. My gosh. Even aside from the fact that this is completely unrealistic to begin with, the fact that this movie's main message seems to be encouraging people on the spectrum to be berated by neurotypical people and up to the point where they stop being autistic altogether is just a really gross message to send overall. The dad's constant abuse to his son is not really called out at all throughout this film, and somehow at the end, everything is magically better for Ezra, and he's no longer suffering from autism, quote unquote, having been led to a better place by his amazing neurotypical father. Especially given the fact that the film states that the dad was abused by Ezra's grandfather, played by Robert De Niro, as stated before, you'd think he'd know better and be able to break this cycle. And speaking of Robert De Niro, it's probably worth bringing up exactly how he specifically ended up in this film. As stated before, Robert De Niro has an 18-year-old son who is autistic himself. However, Robert De Niro has come under fire in recent memory for perpetuating the belief that vaccines cause autism. Not only is this a completely bogus claim that has been disproved many times over at this point, the fact that De Niro was greenlit to be in this project just because he's a big name, and not because his beliefs aligned with anything healthy for the autistic community, really shows what this movie was really all about, simply viewing autistic people as a prop, merely existing to boost neurotypical people up. Despite being a long-renowned actor who has starred in some of the greatest films in American history, Robert De Niro is still under the false pretense that vaccines can cause autism. The fact that De Niro is a big name who has starred in some of the greatest films of all time means his words have a big influence, so sadly, there are very likely a big group of people who choose to believe vaccines cause autism just because he said it without doing much further research. This is incredibly frustrating, especially when his co-star in this film is an actual autistic child. I can only imagine what William Fitzgerald thought of all this during the initial production of this film. Overall, despite showing probably the most potential out of these films I reviewed so far, since its main character was played by an actual autistic actor, Ezra is still nothing more than a piece of awful inspiration porn, simply existing for neurotypical people instead of autistic people, and also just spreading some really harmful information about autism overall. At the end of the day, autistic people are often healthiest when they are accommodated for, not when they're forced to do something they don't want to do or put into an unhealthy environment for them. This really is never the way to raise an autistic child. It's really disappointing to me that even in the modern day, a film like this is still greenlit by a studio and put into theaters. I really hope we see way less of this in the future, but at this point, only time will tell. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Is Ezra actually a masterpiece? Let me know down in the comments below. Special thanks to my patrons, TGC1996 and Trayvon Gibson. Once again, if you'd like to join the Discord, that's where you can often suggest things for me to cover here on YouTube. And you can also check out my Twitch streams once again if you want to see a Tron Otter playing video games. Also, once again, you can check out my Letterboxd if you want to see what movies I've already reviewed here on the channel. But once again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video or learned something new from it. I've been Otterly Noah, and I'll see you on the Otter's side. Bye!